Hey, this is Professor Homo. Welcome to part 3 of our web page comp. And in this video, we're just going to pretty much focus on vector shapes. And it may seem simple, but there's a little more to vector shapes than you might have been aware of in the past. Now, where we left off, we made our little header image up here, and we put everything inside of a header folder, or a layer group, as they call it. And there's a text layer that has my tagline up at the top, or my description. There's the logo for the Johnson Lawn Care, and there's two photos. The one in the top is the one that we're seeing. I like that one because it was a little more open than this one with all the flowers. I thought it was more about lawn care. So I used the one that's at the top. I could turn off the bottom one. And if you remember, we used a layer mask so that you could move it around. Now, if I'm set with the way it is, that's fine. But let's say, just for example, I wanted to move the logo down just a little bit to make sure it's centered vertically up and down. And I might actually want to move my text down to be in line with the bottom part of this word Johnson here. You know, if I drug a guide down and it was down there, it could probably go down just a little bit. Now, if I did that, if I clicked on my text and just moved it down a little bit, it gets a little close to that dark line. It's almost a little distracting, and I might just want to move my picture down a little bit. Now, if I had cropped the picture, there isn't anything I could really do, but the fact that I have a layer mask, I could click on the picture and just kind of nudge it down a little bit and just give a little more room. And that's part of the flexibility of using a layer mask as opposed to cropping it. You can always apply the layer mask, and then it'll kind of permanently crop the picture, but you could leave it there for a while as long as you need. It will increase the file size, but it gives you some flexibility, especially if you're building a comp for someone. And again, I'm going to close my layer folder up, and what I'm going to start working with is just putting the shapes of color like our sample here. Now, I'm not going to use the same colors because I'm going to use it based on my picture, but I'm going to put a color for the address bar, the footer bar, the navigation area, and the I guess the aside section, or where my inset pictures are, or whatever you'd use over there. So, and I'm going to pull the colors from this, and you can see there's not as much browns, colors like that. There's some reds over here, there's some blues, there's some yellows, there's a little, I guess, kind of reddish brown, and obviously there's all kinds of shades of light green and dark green that I'll use in here as well. So I'm going to draw some vector shapes. Now, one thing to mention about vector shapes, and I wasn't aware of all this because I only did vector shapes a certain way, and vector shapes wasn't always a part of Photoshop, but if you use your rectangle tool, and that's what I'm going to use, notice that you have settings up here for fill, for stroke weight, and also for type of stroke. So it gives you some settings before you start. So if you knew you were going to, if you knew you didn't want a stroke on it, if you knew you were just going to make rectangle shapes, which is what we're going to do, you may not want to put a stroke on it. So if I just draw a shape, I'm just going to draw a shape in the middle right now. If I did want to put a stroke on it, you can, as long as you're still on this tool, as long as you stay on this rectangle tool, which is kind of not the way other programs are. Usually to make changes, you would go to the arrow tool and select it, but they actually do it when you're on the tool. You can go up here and you can add a stroke. You can see there's my stroke. If I wanted to make it, I could exaggerate the thickness of the stroke. I could change the style of the stroke and put a dotted line. Now, if I go to my arrow, I can no longer change that. I can't change the stroke or any of those settings. I can change the fill color. You can see over here in my layer palette, it's called Rectangle 1. And if I double click right on that rectangle icon, it brings up this little color picker, and I can change the color. I can move around here and change the fill color. I can even take my eyedropper and select any parts, and it updates immediately right on the stage, or right on the page of what I'm doing. So I could sample colors from anything that I'm looking at and it updates it immediately. I cannot change my stroke by doing this. So if I hit OK here, in order to change the stroke, I'd have to go back with my rectangle tool and then change it up here. Turn this off, put it down to 0, or just take away the color and put the color on none. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Now you can, if you use this, you can select a color here and you bring out a color picker. But just one thing to point out, when you move the color picker around or sample areas from your picture, it does not update the shape. So if you wanted to make shapes that you wanted to preview what the color looked like on your page, this isn't the way to do it. So it's kind of a nice way to start, and if you're making buttons and you want to put strokes on, you could probably use this method. But if you just want to alter the color, you're probably better off going over here and double clicking on that. Now keep in mind, you can also add a layer style. You could go to layer style and just go to color fill, or color overlay, I'm sorry, you could go here, and that way it puts a temporary color, and you could still go on here and choose colors, and it will actually sample colors. And that way, if you don't like the color, you could turn it off and go find another. That's a temporary. So those are two ways to change colors of these shapes. And we're going to just make shapes without any strokes right now until we make our navigation buttons. We're going to put a stroke on them. So let me get out of here, and I'll just take my arrow, and I could just delete that shape. Now it makes a new layer every time you make one of these shapes. So I'm going to start with the address bar up here, and I'm going to make a shape. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool, and it's going to kind of stick to the guidelines that I have up here. So there's my shape. Now I don't necessarily want that brown color, so I'm going to double click over here, and I still want a dark color because I have this light green, so I might, I could choose a dark color from the shadow. That looks nice. I could choose even a deeper, more earthier color from over here, even more of a bluish color. Actually, that doesn't look bad. I picked a color out of here. I'll just use that for now. That's fine. It's kind of like a dark, almost a little, and you can adjust this a little. So if it's not perfect, if you want a little lighter, you can move this around in the color picker. Okay, so that's my color that I have there, and you could copy this. So I could hold down my Option key and do a drag copy, or I could copy and paste. And I'm just checking if they have a duplicate. I don't think they have a duplicate, although you could duplicate the layer down here, although it puts it right on top, and sometimes it's hard to find. So I'm just going to do a drag copy. Hold down my Option key, and when you see this double arrow here, you could copy it. And I'm going to move this down here, and this will serve as my footer bar at the bottom, because I'm going to use the same colors for them, so they'll increase some contrast here. And I have rectangle 1 copy and rectangle, or rectangle, however you want to pronounce it. And I like to have the one that's above visually also be above in the layer palette. So I'm going to move rectangle 1 back up here, and I'm going to call it address bar. Or I could even call it address shape, because that's really what it is, and then I'll know that that's the actual shape. And then the one at the bottom, I'll nudge that down a little, and I'll call that footer shape. And eventually these will be inside layer folders. I don't think I have that named right. They'll be inside layer folders that'll be with that will be with text and other things that'll be inside there. Some of these may just have text in their shape, and that's all they'll have. I'll just call it footer shape, and that's it. I have those two there. I'm not going to put them in layer folders yet until I have other things. Now these ones on the side, I'll make other ones on the side here, and I'll start with this one on the side. This one I'm going to make a little heavier, and when I mean heavier, I mean a little bit darker of color, because just to create kind of this angular design here, because I have a heavier shape on the upper left, and I'd like to have it balance off. Otherwise, it might be too heavy on the left side. And I'm also going to have buttons here, which will, bring your attention here. So I'm going to make it a little heavier over here, so I create this kind of left to right kind of design. But I'm going to go lighter. So I'll double click on the color there, and maybe I'll choose another. I'm going to move this so I can see it. Now I don't want the same color there, but I may use a lighter color. I may choose to bring in some of this, beigey kind of color over here. It might be a nice variation instead of having everything in green. Just kind of a nice off-white there kind of creates a nice little difference. I might leave it in there. I'm going to have photos on here, so that creates a nice backdrop. And again, I could always change that. So I'll hit OK, and I'll name that a side shape, because that's the shape I'm using for a side. And I could copy this, but I think these might be different sizes. So I'm just going to draw a new one over here. And here's my other shape, and it looks nice in that color, but I'm going to vary this a little bit. Now I could have a darker, actually I was saying I wanted to have I'm going to leave this one this color. Maybe I'm going to go darker, I think, with this color. So for my side shape, maybe I'll go a little darker over here, and maybe I'll pick like a kind of a lighter green here from the trees. And that way I get a little variation here. Now I didn't use any reds or any other colors, but I got a little off-white. So that way I'll use darker buttons over here, and I mentioned having the little balance. That's kind of what I intended to do. So I'm going to leave it like that right now, with a lighter color here, darker color here, photos over here, buttons over here. These are my vector shapes, and that's all I need right now. So I'm going to make sure I name them. The one on the left side I'm going to call nav shape, because they're all shapes that I'm working with. And then the one over here, which I think I have to move over a little bit, I'm going to call that one a side shape, and I think I have them all named. I have the 4 shapes that are here, and again, I'm not going to put them in layer folders until I have other stuff that go in the layer folders. So I guess one thing I could do real quick is I'll put my text that goes up here. I'm just going to put the address up here, and again, I'll just start that off, but then I'll type it in, because remember, the address is just this address here, which is on the instruction sheet that I gave you. So I'm going to put this stuff and this stuff in, and I'm probably just going to use white type, Helvetica type for that. So I'll pause that and just put that in, because you don't need to watch me do that.